All right, y'all, welcome to the Scott Horton Show. I am the director of the Libertarian Institute, editorial director of antiwar.com, author of the book Fool's Errand, Time to End the War in Afghanistan, and I've recorded more than 5,000 interviews going back to 2003, all of which are available at scotthorton.org. You can also sign up for the podcast feed. The full archive is also available at youtube.com/Scott Horton Show. Hey guys, on the line, I've got Dan Cohen, and he hosts a YouTube show called Behind the Headlines. And if anybody was going to take that name after Justin died and his column stopped running, then I'm glad it was you. Dan, welcome to the show. How are you doing, son?
Oh, I'm good. I didn't realize that was borrowed. But I mean, to be fair, it wasn't my choice. But all respect.
You know what? There were already things called that before Justin called his column that, and there will always be things called Behind the Headlines. It was not that original a take. But I was glad to see. I think you're the first one to use that name after he died.
All right.
I was happy to see it because, in fact, I forgot what it was. The first thing that was it the Uyghurs or was something before that I saw you just debunking the living hell out of something and thought, this is
that could have been it. Definitely, I did a couple pieces on that.
Yeah,
on that
sure.
whole thing.
All right, now. So here's the thing that people need to know about you is that, and you can go back to the archives and hear my interview, Dan, about this. You made a documentary with Max Blumenthal about the 2014 war, as they call it, I guess, in Gaza, Operation Cast Lead, and all of the aftermath of that. It's called Killing Gaza. It's only $3 to watch it on the internet, and it's so good. I really, really encourage people to go and take a look at that. And see that entire thing from Dan's point of view. You're the one who did, I think, the lion's share, the early, the camera work and the interviews early in the thing there, and so it's obviously given you a hell of a perspective about Israel-Palestine. And I saw where on your Twitter there, you were talking about what's going on in Jerusalem and these people getting kicked out of their houses. And really, I wanted to talk with you about Colombia, but then I thought, nah, you know what? Let's start with all of this East Jerusalem stuff, because I know you've been following it closely and it's so important.
Sure. Yeah. We can talk about both those things, definitely.
Yeah. So what's going on there with there's been a couple of viral clips going around the internet lately.
Well, in East Jerusalem, I mean there's not any, real physical distinction between East and West Jerusalem. East Jerusalem is the legally occupied area of Jerusalem, and West Jerusalem is the area that was ethnically cleansed in 1947, 1948, and then a bunch of Israeli settlers came in. Then in 1967, Israel, occupies the West Bank, Gaza, everything, and it's been settling, colonizing these neighborhoods ever since. Not only building new settlements, but expelling Palestinians who've been living there for generations and generations from their homes. And there's one neighborhood in particular right now called Sheikh Jarrah, which is, I mean, if you go to Jerusalem, you go around like the old city, any of the cool, pretty tourist sites, it's really close. One of the popular hotels called the American Colony Hotel, which has, a great bookstore, Palestine-related things, is right there. So, I mean, it's not like it's far away from where a lot of people go. And so you have the Israeli government sponsoring these fanatical settlers, expelling people from their homes, where, as I said, they lived for many, many years, entire families. And this has been, this is not the first time this has happened in Sheikh Jarrah. About almost a decade ago now, this was another hotbed of expulsions, and there was, a pretty decent protest movement, but it kind of died down for some years, and now it's, with these latest expulsions, it's picked back up. Mm-hmm. And so you have not only armed settlers going in and expelling people, but you have, of course, what they call border police, which are essentially just soldiers, Israeli soldiers, going in and expelling them too. So and the people kind of at the head of this are the Kahanists, the most fanatical, extreme right wing Zionists that there basically are, who explicitly say we want a theocratic, fascist state, completely free of non-Jews. So, all Palestinians, Muslims, Christians, anyone has to be ethnically cleansed. And if they, refuse to leave on their own, then we'll kill them. In fact, I have a recording that I did of the head of one of these top Kahanist rabbis explaining. I secretly recorded this along with my colleague David Sheen, and a great Israeli journalist, whose work you should check out. And we recorded them explaining that that they want to go around the Middle East, Lebanon, Jordan, Syria, Iraq, Iran, Turkey, even out of the Middle East, and take all this area over, and anyone who refuses to submit gets beheaded with a sword. So, obviously they're not really in position to do that, but nonetheless, this is the genocidal ideology, the mindset behind these Kahanists. And the Kahanists, thanks to Benjamin Netanyahu, essentially, have now entered the Knesset. They are now more powerful than ever. Not only had their ideology really taken over a lot of the mainstream Likud, the most powerful, the ruling party for decades, but now as their own explicit party, really, the mask is coming off. Now they're in the parliament and they're feeling more empowered than ever. And, of course, with the total impunity provided by the Biden administration, then, they're just going full throttle.
Oh, man. So, and by the way, because I was going to call you out there. Oh, yeah, that sounds hyperbolic. But then he said, nah, I even got the video there. I saw that on your Twitter feed earlier. It's a link to the Electronic Intifada video. Temple Movement Rabbi proselytizes for genocide. First-hand recording there that you got and posted here. I was going to play the clip, but it's almost 7 minutes long. He goes on here.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible. I was, I don't speak good Hebrew, so I was just sitting there kind of twiddling my thumbs in this meeting, trying to look normal. But David is sitting there with me. We managed to get inside this thing, and he's just in shock, and he's trying to keep his face from contorting too much. And they just explain that it's genocide. I mean, there's no different than what you'd hear from an ISIS leader. And so, this is the ideology. This is the mindset of these fanatical settlers that are now have long been in power, but are really, just more empowered than ever. And even the U.S. government considered the Kahanists and their actual group called the Jewish Defense League, and its successor Kahana Chai, Kahana Lives, as a terrorist group. They're listed as a terrorist group. So they reformed under a new banner, and now they're in the government, and the U.S. and the Biden administration isn't saying anything. So basically, a U.S. listed terrorist group is now in the Israeli parliament, and is leading the charge to ethnically cleanse these Palestinians from Sheikh Jarrah. It's just beyond reprehensible.
It is. It's insane to see. And now, can you elaborate a little bit about what you mean about now that Biden is in, the carte blanche is even broader than before? It's even easier for them to go ahead and do this now? Why?
Right. Well,
how could anybody be more Zionist apologist than Donald J. Trump?
I mean, it's a good question, but I obviously I'm no fan of Trump. As horrible as Trump was on Israel, Palestine, as totally pro-Israel as he was, Israel killed more Palestinians under the Obama administration than it did under the Trump administration. And Israel killed a lot of Palestinians under Trump.
Well, in any given 4 years of Obama too, I think you could say.
Yeah. I mean, that's what my documentary shows. That's what Killing Gaza shows, is Operation Protective Edge, as the Israelis call it. This is just mass slaughter of 2,200 Palestinians.
I said Cast Lead. I always get those confused. Which one is which?
Well, there's so
there.
many.
Sorry about
they've
that.
done so many slaughters of Gaza that it's easy to get them mixed up. But it's so I don't blame you. But
so Cast Lead was 2012, and 2014 was Protective Edge. Is that right?
That's even crazy. It was Cast Lead was 29, and then Pillar of Cloud was 2012, and then Protective Edge, right? Yeah.
Man. So, I mean, it's like trying to remember the internet name of everybody you meet in real life. It's
right. Yeah, exactly. So I mean, just what did Tony Blinken say? That he I mean, he's just totally pro-Israel, and I can't remember his exact quote, but it was like he, pledged his loyalty to AIPAC, essentially, to Israel at an AIPAC conference. And Biden has said that you don't even have to be Jewish to be a Zionist. I mean, these guys will let Israel get away with everything. It's all, it's not even surprising, of course, but it's still shocking and just, beyond the pale.
Yeah. In fact, that's a really funny clip, I think, where somebody challenges him about whether he's Zionist enough. And he goes, hey, man, I'm as Zionist as Zionism can be. Let me tell you about Zionism. There's no such thing as daylight. You hear me? No daylight. Zionism, Zionism, Zionism. I'm the most Zionist senator of all. He says it as many times as he can in his answer. He's just going off because he wants the point to be so clear that you guys lead, exactly. I'll follow.
Exactly.
Now, one of the things about this viral clip going around is that this guy's from Brooklyn. So there's this kind of mythology. After all, I wasn't born till the 70s, right? There's this whole mythology that, like, yeah, well, the aftermath of the worst thing that ever happened, World War II, and maybe there were a few Palestinians there, but we don't like to talk about that too much. But these people really needed a safe place to go and all this and that. Well, so wait a minute. But that includes people from New York City? Have the divine right to displace Palestinians, not in what we call Israel, but what we call the Palestinians' West Bank? Or, in this case, East Jerusalem. I don't know why they always separate it out. Looks like Jerusalem's on the West Bank to me. But anyway, as you said, they already, completely annexed all of Western Jerusalem way back in 47, 48. Now, here they are kicking Palestinian Muslims and Christians out of the east side of town. And this lady is saying it because, it's the age of viral video, right? Everybody has a 4K camera in their pocket. And so instead of being this kind of mysterious, shrouded, brown, barbarian, heathen kind of mysterious thing, it's just some lady with a phone saying to this guy, what are you doing? That's my house. And he just says in a New York accent, if I didn't take it, somebody else was going to. So screw you, lady. But he sits there and they talk back and forth about it. And in the video, of course, it's shot from her point of view. And it's impressive how she is at least, in fact, since she's the defender here, she is, seemingly like easier to identify with than the person that she's accusing, right? Like he's clearly trespassing and admits it. And he's just saying, tough luck for you. But what's the excuse for that? When the guy isn't a refugee from World War II, he's a refugee from, de Blasio.
Right. No, that's an incredible clip. You get these like rare moments of honesty from these people because they'll usually say, well, God gave me this land. It's in the Bible. And that's kind of you can't really win that argument because it's like, if it's just my God versus your God, then it's just power of will, whoever has more force behind them. But the guy just says it straight up. He's like, look, if I don't steal it, then someone else will. And he's got this thick Brooklyn accent, and it's like as if he was like at a pizza parlor and he like stole somebody's slice of pizza, and they were like, hey, and he's like, it's like, hey, someone else would take it, whatever. And he just doesn't care. It's just so nonchalant. I mean, it's these are actually, one of the really interesting aspects of the Kahana movement, the most, extreme right wing of Israel, is Americans are very disproportionately represented. Kahana himself, was from Brooklyn. So many of the most extreme right wing Israeli settlers, and not all of them, but many of them, are American or have American roots. Maybe, their parents moved there, a generation ago. So, and it has something, I think, to do with maybe, it's like as an American, if you're just like some like white American person and you don't have like some kind of identity to latch onto, then you go to Israel and you're like, oh, I'm, I can be like Jewish here, but, in like this cool way. And it's like something you can just latch onto and be part of instead of like being just like a boring, like lost person in our kind of, hyper individualistic society in the US. And so that's part of, why so many Americans get into that. And I've seen it firsthand with even, members of my own extended family. So not getting to the like totally extreme, but in terms of really latching onto Zionism when they had like no Jewish identity or upbringing to speak of, and they were just kind of like lost people. So that's, there's so much of that. There's such a huge American presence in the ultra right wing of Zionism.
Okay, you guys, check it out. The new book is finally done. Enough already. Time to end the war on terrorism. It's available in paperback and Kindle. Also, the audiobook is coming, although that might take a little while. For all those who participated in the big fundraiser of 2019, I have the list, and you will be getting all your stuff as soon as my boxes of wholesale copies arrive. Thank you so much to everybody for your support of the show and of the Libertarian Institute, and I hope you like the book. Hey guys, Scott Horton here for expanddesigns.com. Harley Abbott and his crew do an outstanding job designing, building, and maintaining my sites, and they'll do great work for you. You need a new website? Go to expanddesigns.com/Scott and save $500. Hey guys, check out Listen and Think audiobooks. They're at listenandthink.com and of course on audible.com. And they feature my book, Fool's Errand, Time to End the War in Afghanistan, as well as brand new out Inside Syria by our friend Reese Erlich, and a lot of other great books, mostly by libertarians there. Reese might be one exception, but essentially they're all libertarian audiobooks. And here's how you can get a lifetime subscription to Listen and Think audiobooks. Just donate $100 to The Scott Horton Show at scotthorton.org/donate. So now, politically speaking, there's really kind of a crack up among liberal Zionists, right? And so essentially the story was, don't worry, there's going to be a two-state solution someday, and so you can rest assured that what looks like apartheid now is still just a temporary solution until we get everything worked out. But then really that's been revealed, especially in the last few years, the way Netanyahu has just said outright that they're going to annex. In fact, they backed off a bit, but not enough. They made it clear from the river to the sea, there will be one monopoly security force there. It's all Israel. It was the West Bank and the Gaza Strip were all annexed back in 1967. It's just now they're basically admitting it. Not all the way, but pretty darn much. And so then that means the whole argument about why this is somehow tolerable because of how temporary it is in the United States is over. And so now you have real conflict about what's going to happen there. So I wonder what's your take on that, and especially in terms of the news that Netanyahu has failed to put together a government and that the president of Israel has designated this guy, Lapid, to be the next one to try to see if he can put together a majority in the Knesset there, their parliament there. And
Right.
what you think that might have to do with, liberal Jewish support especially, but overall liberal support for Zionism in the U.S.
Well, one of the most interesting things that it took me years to pick up after, living there and actually really like studying the Israeli right wing and kind of even embedding among them a little bit. Like those kinds of recordings that I got, I had to kind of like blend in a little bit. Not that I didn't steal any homes or like kick anyone out of their house or anything, but basically
snipe some kid at a fence.
Did not do any of that. I would talk to those kinds of soldiers. Like I remember talking to this guy who like operated a bulldozer where they would just like demolish people's homes and like, I was just kind of casually talking to him, trying to get him open up. And he was like, he just thought it was the coolest job, just driving a bulldozer into someone's home. And he had like a bobcat, like necklace on, he was really proud, but one of the things that I picked up on, and it took me a long time to realize, is that U.S. support for Israel over the decades has actually made Israel more extreme, because the whole idea of religious Zionism, of like the right wing, is that the state is holy and it's expanding and it's making this like biblical prophecy of a messianic era come true. And so then when the peace process was implemented, the so-called peace process, essentially land for exchange, Israel pulls out of like Egypt, and then eventually the Oslo Accords and the Gaza withdrawal, each one of those had a really, really radicalizing effect on the Israeli public, shifting it to the right, especially this, and basically growing the settler movement. And so, this whole idea of like liberal Zionism in the U.S., just, this like hand wringing, and, we just have to support the peace process and then we'll get somewhere and blah, blah, blah. This has actually been the biggest ideological, you have this hard right wing ideology from the settler movement, not only the settler movement, but especially in the settler movement. And then you have the radicalization of that ideology, of really going to its logical conclusion, of like, for example, destroying the Dome of the Rock and building a temple and all that stuff, that and basically empowering the ultra right wing of Zionism as we're seeing now. That is a result of liberal Zionism, of the peace process. It's bringing Zionism to its logical conclusion, and so, I mean, it provides this kind of facade. Liberal Zionism provides, which doesn't even really exist in Israel, I should say. It's a pretty much American phenomenon, liberal Zionism, of people, armchair Zionists who are like, oh, I support Israel and all this stuff, but like, I don't actually want to live there. I just want like an extra state just in case, a place to go like vacation and go have my kid have his bar mitzvah at the Wailing Wall in occupied East Jerusalem. And so this, one of the I think good things actually about the Trump era is he did a lot to really demolish that illusion. Not that he knew he was doing it, he was just trying to be as pro-Israel as possible. And so that's what Netanyahu did with announcing that annexation. Now Netanyahu basically traded the annexation for normalization with some of the Gulf monarchies, with the UAE, and to a lesser degree with Saudi Arabia. And so now he's backed off of it for now. But so liberal Zionism can say like, oh, look, so now the peace process is actually advanced. Like now Israel's normalizing with more Arab countries and Israel can be a normal country. But now with Netanyahu, basically, because Israel is such a dysfunctional society in so many ways, the politics are so insanely dysfunctional. Now they have to, Netanyahu has essentially failed to make a government. And so the president, Rivlin, has given the mandate to Yair Lapid, who is, basically like, he's definitely, as all Zionists are, he's like a right-wing guy, more like secular in his lifestyle, but is definitely a hardcore militarist, will definitely, kill just as many Palestinians as Netanyahu would. And I think liberals are going to be happy to see that Lapid, if he's able to come up with a government, to get a coalition, they'll be happy to see him, because a lot of liberals right now are like, oh, Netanyahu is bad. Netanyahu is the bad guy. He's the bad one because of his corruption and all this stuff. And he doesn't really represent Israel, when actually Netanyahu is like he's the longest serving prime minister in Israeli history. He is the epitome of an Israeli prime minister. Brutal, corrupt, just rotten to the core. And so I don't know if Lapid is going to be able to do it, or even if they'll have to have elections again. What is this, the fourth round of elections they've had in like 2 years? It's a totally dysfunctional system. Yeah. But I don't know where it's going to go from here. It's just like permanent dysfunction.
Well, I had a friend who said that, he thought best case scenario was Netanyahu survives and then is extraordinarily just the weakest version of Netanyahu that we could have. Whereas if this guy Lapid especially wins, because Bennett is such a right winger, but since Lapid is known as a click to the left, maybe half of one, these are very small clicks, but he's known as a click to the left of Netanyahu. And so then especially liberal Democrats get to pretend to breathe a sigh of relief that somehow now someone is reasonable in there that we can deal with and it's going to be fine, even though nothing had changed in any substantive way.
Exactly. Though I will say about Netanyahu, because Netanyahu spent a lot of his formative years in the U.S., he speaks perfect English. He like knows how to appeal to American sensibilities, and he he's really trained in that. Lapid, if you ever listen to Lapid talk, he sounds like an Israeli, or he talks like this, and he just sounds like a lumbering oaf.
Mm.
And he's not well spoken. So, I mean, and the reason that he would be seen as a click to the left, as you put it, to Netanyahu, is because Netanyahu, in order to survive, to advance this far politically, Netanyahu has had to move to the right, and make common cause with the most fanatical settler elements.
Yeah.
But it's not like there's no doubt, not a shred, that Lapid wouldn't do the exact same. I mean, the settlers basically run the country. All Netanyahu's advisors all around him are all settlers. The biggest parties are all taken over by settlers. The institutions, and that's been a long-term plan enacted really since the 80s. In the wake of the withdrawal, the Camp David peace accords, they decided, oh wait, if the state is not going to do what we want exactly, we have to take it over. We just have to take over the state. So, and that's what they've done, and including all the way around Netanyahu.
Yeah. Hey, y'all, let me tell you about the Libertarian Institute's latest book, What Social Animals Owe to Each Other, by our executive editor, the great Sheldon Richman. For decades, Richman has been explaining libertarianism to the left from the left. He makes a strong case that any honest liberal, progressive, or leftist actually should be libertarians, since in fact it is freedom itself that provides what y'all want. Richman argues the case for liberty and peace, the human spirit and social cooperation, for true liberalism, libertarianism, against the corrupt forces of statism, corporatism, and violence. What Social Animals Owe to Each Other by Sheldon Richman. Now available at libertarianinstitute.org/books. Hey guys, Scott Horton here for Mike Swanson's great book, The War State. It's about the rise of the military-industrial complex and the power elite after World War II, during the administrations of Harry Truman, Dwight Eisenhower, and Jack Kennedy. It's a very enlightening take on this definitive era on America's road to world empire. The War State by Mike Swanson. Find it in the right-hand margin at scotthorton.org. Okay, and so here's an addendum on our interview. We recorded the other one on Friday, and now we're catching up on Monday. That's Friday the 7th, and now we're catching up on Monday the 10th here. So, Dan, first of all, before we get to Colombia, if you could please just give us an update on what has been going on in Jerusalem over the weekend here.
Well, since we talked on Friday, the Israeli government is continuing to push these settler takeovers in Sheikh Jarrah, this neighborhood that's basically under siege. And so this has basically informed Palestinians to rally around not only the neighborhood, but the holy site, the Al-Aqsa compound, which is, the most kind of important and sensitive site in the country. And it's kind of the symbol of Palestinian nationalism, not only an important holy site. And so, this is where there's these huge demonstrations, and it's basically to repel these settler groups that come in and agitate, and they want to destroy the Al-Aqsa compound, basically take a bulldozer or a bomb to it and build some what they claim is a third temple. And so the Israeli police, basically the Israeli military, has come in and just beat the living hell out of these protesters and journalists, using just extreme force. If you just look on Twitter, there's just all kinds of shocking videos. And since that happened, just today, Monday, I guess it's Monday afternoon in Palestine, the armed resistance in Gaza has decided to launch rockets, basically to defend Jerusalem, and it's been pretty effective. The videos of these fanatical settlers, that are chanting death to Arabs and Muhammad is dead, they fled from the streets, so they are suddenly getting a little taste of their own medicine, just a little drop. And those rockets didn't injure anyone. Realistically, they're more symbolic than anything. They so rarely have any kind of casualties.
Just to clarify, these rockets, they can't hit East Jerusalem with them. You're talking about protesters where in Tel Aviv or something else, or what am I missing?
No, they can make it to Jerusalem. They
Oh,
have
really?
advanced technology. They can make it to Jerusalem. Yeah.
All right. Well, I
Um,
did not realize that. Okay.
yeah, which, from an engineering perspective is pretty impressive considering, they're under siege and have nothing.
Yeah, it's not like they
So
imported those missiles from Iran.
right, exactly. And I mean, one thing to keep in mind, I think it was 1 or 2 years ago, the Israeli military was considering canceling the sirens that they ring out around Gaza and the Israeli settlements around Gaza because the alarms were causing more damage, more bodily harm than the rockets themselves because people would get like scared or they would run and trip and fall. So it just goes to show how, symbolic these rockets actually are. Um, that the sirens are actually more dangerous than the rockets themselves.
Yeah.
Um,
Although at least as you're saying, they've got a further range on them, so they can make a statement in places further than before. But
exactly.
it's and Israelis are killed by these things from time to time. I think there was a boy in an apartment that was killed back a few years
Right.
ago. But
Right.
emphasis on time to time. I mean, these things really are homemade rockets, not missiles.
Right, exactly. It's extremely rare. I mean, if you compare one of the rockets that like Al-Qassam, the armed wing of Hamas, and flies out of Gaza, compared to like one Israeli missile, it's like 1,000 rockets you need for one missile. So it's just no comparison. Um, So in response to this, now the Israeli government has now just launched some attack on Gaza and just killed apparently 11 people, including at least 3 or 4 children. So this is just so typical of Israel. It's just there's some kind of it basically lights a fire in Jerusalem. It's usually in Jerusalem, and then attacks the holy sites, Al-Aqsa, and then the armed resistance in Gaza, which is basically the only armed resistance that's left in all of Palestine, responds, and then Israel comes in with overwhelming, military superiority and kills a bunch of civilians and children, and then the West is going to say, oh, we want calm on both sides. Meanwhile, it's Israel that's totally at fault, and Israel has all of the power here.
Yeah. So I'm curious of whether the Netanyahu government is saying anything about this. Like, look, we want that land, screw these people, or are they not even trying to justify it, or what?
The Israeli Foreign Ministry put out some statement on Twitter calling it a like a private real estate disagreement. Just trying to say, oh, this is nothing. The Palestinians are overreacting. It's private, it's private business. And Mahmoud Abbas and the Palestinian Authority are inciting everyone. Meanwhile, it's just straight up ethnic cleansing. And
So in other
everyone
words,
knows
they're just the way that they're handling it is to just outright lie and mischaracterize the
exactly,
entire situation.
exactly.
Yeah. And I'm sorry, go ahead with what you were saying about the ethnic cleansing there. Because that's what we call this anywhere else in the world, especially if it's governments we disfavor who are abetting it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's no other term for this. It's ethnic cleansing. People being removed, physically removed, expelled from their homes for the crime of being the wrong ethnicity because they're not Jewish. And this is the story of Israel, the story of Zionism from the very beginning. And it just hasn't really changed. It just goes on. And, the so-called international community gives Israel total impunity, gives Israel all the weapons and, an aid in the world. And so Palestinians are just isolated and have, really nowhere to turn. And so all that's left for them is armed resistance. And then, then the international community is going to condemn them for that too. So, they know that their destiny is really in their own hands.
Dan, I read a thing. I used to be so good with the footnotes. I'm sorry, but I'm almost certain it was a former head of Shin Bet. It could have been Mossad, but I think it was a former head of Shin Bet, which is their kind of MI5, FBI counterintelligence division sort of equivalent, their internal policing thing. And that they had busted a group of Jewish extremists who had already planted explosives all throughout the Al-Aqsa Mosque and were ready to detonate it. And I'm trying to remember because I think it was even, someone who rose to become a politician. You know about this?
Yeah, there was several attempts to bomb the Al-Aqsa compound, particularly in the 80s. And this is one of the things actually when when we talked the other day, I was talking about how the peace accords that the peace process has actually radicalized the Israeli society. All of these attempts were in response to the withdrawal from the Sinai, from Egypt. So the Camp David Accords, basically, in order to prevent that from happening, a bunch of Israeli settlers decided, well, a group of them decided, we are going to bomb the Al-Aqsa compound. The most famous attempt was led by a settler named Yehuda Etzion. And basically, they took a long time and got Israeli military personnel involved. There was an explosives expert. There was an Air Force pilot. They planned it out like immaculately, and basically they obtained all of the bombs, all this stuff, and then they decided to not do it at the last minute because they just thought it was a little too over the pale. And then what they decided to do is continue to doing like terrorist attacks against Palestinian civilians. And so they went to basically put a bunch of bombs on buses of Palestinian civilians, and they got caught doing that. And then their plans for bombing Al-Aqsa that they had basically tabled were revealed. But there were other attacks that were successful. So, that's not the only one, and there were several of them. And those movements that in the 80s were, still marginal, totally extreme, but marginal. Those are mainstream today. Those are in the Knesset. That's what Itamar Ben-Gvir, the new Kahanist MK. That's what Bezalel Smotrich. All of these new super extreme right wing settlers that are in the Knesset, that are they're in Sheikh Jarrah. They're in this Palestinian neighborhood. They're in front of the cameras. That's them. That's the same people. It's just the newer generation, and they have the total support of all basically the settler religious Zionist youth.
Mm-hmm. As you mentioned, this is an extremely important holy site to all Muslims. It's known as the place where the Prophet Muhammad rose up to heaven. So after Mecca and Medina, this is third place, is the site of the ancient Jewish temple or ancient Hebrew temples from antiquity and all of that, and has been the site of this Muslim mosque for 1,300 years?
Yeah, about that. So maybe even more, maybe 1,400. I can't remember exactly. Maybe 1,600. I can't remember exactly. I'd have to look. But
anyway, if they do destroy this thing, then that'll be a world war, right? That'll be every Muslim country in the world will have to get in on doing something about that somehow.
I mean, the thing is, I think Saudi Arabia and the UAE, I don't think they'd actually do anything because they're total collaborator regimes. They would, I mean, if they actually bombed Al-Aqsa, of course you'd have a major uprising among Palestinians, among average people. Definitely, there would be just mass unrest, and but I don't think the governments themselves, that all the Western allied governments, would do anything. But I interviewed a top Waqf official. Waqf is the Jordanian Palestinian body that administers the Al-Aqsa compound. And when I asked him what would happen, if Israel destroyed the Dome of the Rock or the Al-Aqsa compound, he was like, it would be the end of Israel. Israel would be finished. That's it. So, I mean, they are playing with extreme fire, and they know it. And I mean, it just doesn't get any more fanatical than these settlers and what they're trying to do. So, it's very serious.
Man. All right. Now, listen, I'm sorry, because the reason I had you on was to talk about Colombia. You're one of the few Western reporters paying attention to this, at least that I can see on Twitter. And I admit I have not been doing a lot of digging. In fact, I've even been overlooking antiwar.com's coverage of it because I've been so busy and spread so thin. But I saw that you were tweeting and putting out videos showing what was going on there, people being killed in a tax protest down there in Colombia, which is a government that the Americans have had as a client for many decades in a row now, uninterrupted, I believe, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So just tell us what's going on there.
Yeah, well, I've had kind of trying to have one eye on Jerusalem and one eye on Colombia, and it's kind of giving me a headache. But no, Colombia is, I mean, it's, there's similarities. Look, Hugo Chavez called Colombia the Israel of South America, years ago, and there's good reason. The two are very, very similar in a lot of ways. Colombia, there's a national strike going on right now, and it basically came in response to this tax reform proposal by the ultra right wing president, total ally of the U.S., Ivan Duque, and basically this tax reform would increase the price of fuel, of coffee, of food, of the most basic supplies, of transportation fare by like some 20%. Colombia is the most unequal country in Latin America. It's 43% of people are in poverty, 15% are extreme poverty. There's hunger. I mean, it's just a nightmare situation. And of course, they're coming out of 50 years of civil war, which is largely a result of the U.S. It's a result of U.S. imperialism, Western imperialism. So in response to this national strike that the labor unions, students, all kinds of activists have organized, which has been really impressive, the government, the military, the police have just cracked down. So far, they've killed, the official numbers are 39 people. But I spoke to a journalist in the city of Pereira where the protests have been really strong. She told me that the hospital told her, we're not allowed to tell you the actual number of deaths. We've been ordered from the national government to not reveal the actual number of deaths. So the only way that journalists can know how many people have actually died is to go to the morgues and to go to the emergency rooms. So no one actually knows how many people have died. Now, in addition to police and military, there's also paramilitaries that the government has armed that are just an extension of the state. They're an extension of the military. And so part of the national strike is you have basically protesters and strikers blocking roadways, so business can't go on as normal. And they're unarmed. They're not violent. And so you have basically wealthy people paying paramilitaries to go and shoot up these strikers. And so they, in the age of cell phone footage, there is a shocking amount of video coming out where you see the police directly facilitating this, helping these paramilitaries come in, shoot up a bunch of unarmed protesters, and then help them escape. So, I mean, it's just incredible to see the amount of violence, and especially when you contrast it with Venezuela and how the U.S. condemns every time Maduro burps or farts in Venezuela, and then here you just have a total bloodbath from the military, paramilitaries, and the U.S. is basically totally silent.
Yeah, just like in Egypt when Sisi massacred 1,000 people after he overthrew the elected government in 2013. John Kerry's like, well, that's the restoration of democracy. Anyway, we're watching Jeopardy. That's it.
Yeah, exactly. Tony Blinken is like, we want everybody just take it easy. Everyone be calm.
Yeah.
So
I saw his statement today on Palestine was, we're concerned.
Right. Very concerned. Yeah.
Very concerned.
I mean, all of this, keep in mind, all of this strike is not only about the tax reform that Duque is pushing, but also, there was this peace accord in 2016 that was
with the FARC, right? Yeah. I was about to ask you, how's that going?
Exactly. So I'm actually working on a documentary about that I'm hoping to have out in a few weeks. I was in Colombia back in December filming this thing, and it's just taking me forever to get this documentary out. But that's kind of one of the subjects in my documentary is the peace accord, and then this entrapment plot that the U.S. ran against it to basically destroy the peace accord and put Colombia back in civil war. And so that's one of the major things is you have this peace accord. The FARC disarms, lays down all their weapons. All these thousands and thousands of fighters agree to integrate into society. They fulfill their end of the bargain, and the government does not. And so what's happening is paramilitaries, extensions of the state are assassinating the ex-combatants. Since the peace accord in 2016, there have been, I think it's now 248 ex-combatants assassinated, and at the same time, they're also killing social leaders. So, any like union leaders, environmental, rights activists, human rights defenders, these kinds of people. There have been about 1,150 of them killed since the peace accord. So they're just basically wiping out, anyone who kind of organizes against the oligarchy, which is basically, Duque and Uribe, the former president, who is really the master of the country. They are not only are they narcos, they've been paid by drug traffickers, by major drug trafficking cartels, and the United States government knows this and supports them. But also, they're just part of big business. So, oil companies that are operating, mining companies, based in the U.S. and Canada, taking gold and all kinds of, wealth, huge amounts of wealth out of Colombia. They're all paying the government. They're all, it's all kind of one big ugly system. And so these are the people who are assassinating. These organizations, not only drug traffickers, but also big business, is assassinating the social leaders and the ex-combatants. And so that's like, just one aspect. Then, so you have, the systematic unfulfillment and the extermination of the social leaders and ex-combatants. You have the Biden administration is pressuring the Colombian government to resume spraying glyphosate on crops in rural areas where they grow coca. There's more cocaine coming out of Colombia than ever. So, the U.S. for so long blamed the FARC, saying, these guys are growing coca, and they're the ones, they're narco guerrillas, is this term they invented. And now the FARC doesn't exist, and there's more cocaine than ever coming from Colombia. And it's obvious that it's the same drug cartels that have existed, that have run the state. And so the U.S. is, including the Biden administration, this started under Trump, but is continuing under Biden. They're pressuring Colombia to resume spraying this horrible chemical.
Oh, yeah, this is Biden's specialty, right? Plan Colombia is his baby for 25 years now, right?
Exactly, yes. It was part of Plan Colombia, this huge military aid package.
It's like a real pet project of his. Just like he used to talk about, here's what we need to do with Iraq. We got to split it into 3 and all these things. Like he knows best what's to be done. He's had a real kind of pet project with Colombia. Here's how we're going to fix Colombia. We're going to give them more helicopters.
Exactly. So, yeah, I mean, that's one of the really shocking things. These Black Hawk helicopters that were given to Colombia free of charge from the U.S. as part of Plan Colombia, this giant military aid package that, they said was going to stop the drug trafficking, but was actually about, defeating the counterinsurgency against the drug lords, the narco state. Yeah. Those helicopters are now being used against protesters, against the strikers.
Right.
There's these shocking videos of these helicopters shooting at people, shooting at strikers. And it's like, wait, this is from the U.S. All of this stuff is from the U.S.
Hey, I'll tell you a story here real quick. I got to butt in a fun anecdote. You'll like it. Ron Paul, I'm 99% sure this was in a speech he gave at the Future Freedom Foundation conference in 2008. Pretty sure. That's what my brain says anyway.
All right.
But I know I got the story right. And the story was, when it's time for Plan Colombia Day up on Capitol Hill, there's only one interest group there. And it's not mothers against cocaine abuse. It's the helicopter companies.
Right.
They're the only ones who show up on Capitol Hill with all their lobbyists and lawyers and dollars and say, listen, it's really important that we continue saving Colombia down there. And then that's it. And there's no one pushing back. There's no one saying, hell no, please leave them alone. For God's sake, they have enough Blackhawks already.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just business. Exactly. That's all it is. And there's nobody even else involved except the helicopter lobbyists. And he saw it year after year after year.
Exactly. The whole idea of stopping the Colombian coke trade from Colombia instead of dealing with the demand here in the U.S., like having some kind of program to treat people who are on it instead of locking them up in prison. Instead, we're just going to criminalize it here, lock people up for decades and decades, and try to and just spray horrible chemicals all over poor farmers who don't have any choice but to grow that to survive. I mean,
Yeah.
that's one of the crazy things. I went to the areas where they grow coca deep, deep, deep in the jungle in Colombia, and it's all just poor people. They're not drug traffickers. They're basically slaves who have no way to survive but to grow coca. And then the drug cartels come and basically take it and jack up the price and sell it to transport it to the U.S. And Europe and make enormous profits, and none of that profit even goes back to Colombia. So and then of course, and that money all it gets laundered into the international banking system.
Yep.
So it's just giant mafia stuff, and
Absolutely.
that's just a major reason that's another one of the major reasons for this strike. So I mean, the trigger was this tax reform, that it's just like it's the kind of the straw that broke the camel's back.
Right.
But I mean, it's really shocking to see what's happening in Colombia right now.
And by the way, Dan, for people who are not familiar, when you say right-wing paramilitaries, that's what they've always been called in Colombia, and that's what probably even Joe Biden calls them that. That's what the official American mainstream media has always referred to them as. They're not really soldiers. They're kind of contractor mercenaries. No question of whose side they're on, And in fact, we didn't really discuss this at all, but we could have set up in the backstory here that for many years, this group, the FARC, this leftist rebel group, controlled an area of Colombia like the size of Switzerland or something. At least, not as mountainous, but not if Switzerland was all spread out, but you know what I mean, on the map. This huge area, and then they came in from the cold and said, essentially, we're sick of fighting, and had this peace deal. And you're saying, I guess, I'm not sure whether you're saying it was always a trap or just in effect it was, because then it was sort of like when Mao encouraged people to criticize the government and then he just killed them all. That was sort of the same thing here. Come in from the cold, tell us where you live and give us your thumbprint, and then we'll see you in a year from now with a knife.
Right. It's a question. It's a real question. Effectively, it was a trap because
sounds like it.
I mean, for one thing, Plan Colombia was all about weakening the FARC. That's what it was about, is defeating the FARC. So what they did, starting in 2002, the CIA started providing the Colombian Air Force with these advanced weapons and targeting technology in order to wipe out the leadership. So it took them a long time, but in 2008, all of a sudden they started killing a bunch of the leadership of the FARC. So it was basically they weakened them over several years and waged extremely intense warfare against the FARC, and then basically decided, okay, now that we've weakened you, we're going to initiate negotiations, so then you'll surrender. And then once they basically, agreed to, integrate and lay down their arms, then not long after, then the ultra-right government of Duque comes in, who's an opponent of the peace accord, explicitly the whole time, and now they're just getting slaughtered. And so there are some breakaway groups, that are that have taken up arms again, but it's not nearly the strength, and it's going to take a long time for them to be able to build back up, if they're able to at all. But so I mean,
sounds like that ship has sailed, man. They're going to have to figure out a way, some other way.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. They're definitely growing, and the government sees them as a real threat. They're calling them the second Marquetalia, which is a reference to where the FARC was born out of. But there are more and more people joining it. There are powerful leaders, and they are recruiting. So it's definitely pretty serious, but it's obviously not at the level that it was. And it's a majorly debated issue. What's the way to do this? There are plenty of people who are maybe ideologically similar, left wing, who do not want to go back into armed struggle, and then there are some who do. And then there are some FARC, former FARC members, fighters who have joined basically, straight up drug trafficking gangs that have no like ideological struggle. They're just, basically become narcos. So there's that aspect to it too. But I mean, right now the main thing is just this massive, massive strike, and where it goes. If I mean, it's every day there's some announcement from the Colombian government where they're just like, well, all right, now we're sending out the military. You have, full militarization of all the cities. Different mayors calling on paramilitaries to come in and private security is what they call them, to come in and secure the city with the help of the police and military. And then, the next day you have like, some civilians and protesters getting assassinated in the street. There are a lot of people who have been disappeared. I don't know exactly, I don't want to say how many. I've seen a lot of numbers floating around, but many people have been disappeared, in the kind of classic Latin America dictatorship, where they just kind of, people are never heard from again, or their body turns up in a river or something like that. So, I mean, it's, Colombia is, it's like all of the US backed governments in Latin America are basically like right-wing dictatorships, like kind of like from, the Reagan era, that kind of thing, of just the most like horrific dictatorships, but they're dressed up as democracies. And so now that there's this uprising with this national strike, it's like Colombia is, revealing itself, but the facade of democracy is kind of peeling away, and it's just coming out as a total narco dictatorship where the military and police and paramilitaries are just gunning people down in the streets on camera, totally documented. And, again, just like in Palestine, the international community is kind of, it's wringing its hands a little bit. But I mean, if you, compare to any of the, if anything happened remotely like this in, Venezuela or Nicaragua or any of the enemy countries of the U.S., the bad regimes, it would just be like, it'd be R2P time. It would be, we gotta go save them and bring them
tell me again,
democracy.
What do you think is the most reasonable estimate of the killed so far in the protests?
So far, I've seen 39, but I think it's a safe bet that it's significantly more than that. I mean, yesterday they shot, I think there were 11 people. There was a paramilitary attack on a protest in the city of Cali. They injured, I think, 11, maybe 14 people. These are kind of numbers I've seen floating around. I'd have to confirm them. But, so there were no deaths yesterday in that protest, and then there was more shootings at night. So, I mean, it's hard to know exactly, but I've seen 39 confirmed.
Yeah. Well, and you're certainly right about how this would play out. We saw the way they did on the first attempted coup, or not the very first one, but of the recent ones in the Trump years, the attempted coups in Venezuela, where it was somehow, I don't know if it was a miracle or if it was, maybe it was the devil at work or what it was, but every American TV station, all combined, and all of the cable news networks could only get one pool camera into all of Caracas. And then that one pool camera could only somehow grab about 40 seconds of footage of an armored personnel carrier driving over a guy who was throwing Molotov cocktails at it in this protest of about like 200 of the richest, whitest people in the country, and completely ignoring. And then it was the same day on Twitter. Of course, where Twitter, say what you will about it. Same thing happened in 2014 too. And same thing happening in Palestine now, where it's the loophole around the mainstream media in so many ways, if you're willing to really look. And at that time, there was drone footage of must have been 100,000 or even 2 or more 100,000 people all marching on the Capitol building in the revolution, all of them facing outward to protect Maduro and the government there. No matter, and you know what? It'd been nice if somebody was asking them, well, what do you like about this guy? But the obvious answer is independence. The opposition are the sock puppets of the American CIA and proudly proclaim it and call for foreign military invasion of their own country. So no wonder people like the current guy if he's the one facing down the traitors. Imagine if Hillary Clinton, after losing to Trump, not only just blamed Russia for stealing it for him, but then literally demanded that China attack America and change the regime and give her the chair instead. And Guaido actually didn't even run for anything. But he was calling for America to invade his own country. Oh, gee, I wonder why there's 200,000 people marching. And I wonder why CNN won't show us. There's, all these people marching on the Capitol to protect it,
Exactly. I mean, it's incredible. For one thing, Colombia has been the launch pad for all of these attacks on Venezuela. Juan Guaido was in Colombia, meeting with Pence and Duque. The Bay of Piglets, that basically attempted invasion by U.S. mercenaries, that was planned, and they basically launched it from Colombia. Then, there have been so many attacks from Colombia. The drone attack on Maduro during that, when he was giving a speech in front of a bunch of people, there was a failed drone attack. Allegedly, that was from Colombia, which all of the hardcore right wing kind of Guaido, people surrounding him, they're based in Colombia. None of them are in Venezuela. They're all in Bogota, except for Leopoldo Lopez, who's in Madrid. That's basically Colombia is the U.S.'s most important asset in the Western Hemisphere for controlling the region, for controlling Latin America. It's such a geostrategically important place. It has access to the Atlantic, to the Caribbean and Pacific, and it's a huge country, and so you can just control so much with it. During the Ecuadorian election recently, we saw how the Colombian Attorney General went to Ecuador to basically conjure up a bunch of lies that aroused the left-wing candidate had ties to the Colombian left-wing militias, the armed groups that still exist. The ELN being one of them, the National Liberation Army, and then other FARC groups. And that was a total lie. There was no evidence. So it's clearly that's a plot by the U.S. to have Colombia go into Ecuador to try to prevent the left-wing candidate from winning, who won the first round but not by a big enough victory, and ended up losing in the second round. And so now we have this right-wing U.S. puppet in Ecuador too. So it's I think people really have to understand what a huge role Colombia plays in U.S. imperialism in Latin America, and so that's one of the reasons it's totally fine. It's just happy to overlook this bloodbath and just I can't imagine what they're telling Duque behind when on the phone or whatever. Or what they're telling Uribe. It's just yeah, do whatever you want. We got your back, buddy.
Yep.
If things get bad, then just send the military in, wipe them all out.
You know what? I think it hurts people's feelings to hear this kind of thing because, hey, I'm from here and stuff like that. But yeah, the CIA, they're butchers. They're bad guys. And they represent special interests, not the interests of the American people at large in any real way. And that's the way it's always been. And everybody over the age of about 14 ought to be able to understand how this works. Come on.
No, they're woke, Scott. The CIA is woke, man.
Yeah. Well, it was the Israelis who invented pink washing, I think, or at least that term was invented to describe when the Israelis slaughter a bunch of Gazans and then hold a big gay rights parade and say, see, we're the most progressive government in the region. You don't have a real problem with us, which works on the right half of the left, right? The liberals from Hillary Clinton to about halfway over go, wow, that's really persuasive, right? And so, yeah, it works. It works like a charm.
It's pretty remarkable how effective that's been in dividing the left. But I don't know.
Smartest thing I ever read by Matt Iglesias, which I don't read much Matt Iglesias, but the smartest thing I ever read by him today was saying he was quoting this white lady who had written this woke manual for companies and for students and all this stuff, and how just what garbage it was. And he said that. And this is Iglesias talking, so from him, it's kind of funny to hear him say it this way. But he said, the more conspiratorial part of him thinks that this could be something produced by something like COINTELPRO, that is deliberately made to destroy the left and get them to argue about this absolute inane garbage instead of who's bailing out which bank and whose throat is the CIA slitting, which he didn't phrase it that way, but that's, of course, the real issue, right? And so, yeah, I don't know why anyone would suspect otherwise, really. Of course it's COINTELPRO. Whether it's the FBI behind it or not, it's the same damn thing, in effect.
Right. I mean, one other thing. Now, I just now published. They just published my video on Colombia explaining this whole
Great.
thing, and at Behind the Headlines. So everyone, check out my YouTube channel, Behind the Headlines. You can just search Behind the Headlines, Dan Cohen.
Yeah,
or look
and
on my
we'll make
Twitter.
sure Sam will link to it in the show notes too, so anybody can
Awesome.
find that. It'll be at the Libertarian Institute and at scotthorton.org, and even at YouTube, I guess we'll have it all too. So.
Awesome. And so one of the things that, I found is that back in February, the Colombian government actually brought in a literal Chilean neo-Nazi to advise them on how to handle this an uprising that he said was inevitable. And he gave this 2-hour presentation using this total kind of gobbledygook pseudo intellectual bogus framework that he calls dissipated molecular revolution, and he claims that there's some international conspiracy, communist conspiracy, starting with the ETA, the Basque separatist movement in Spain, that then became part of Chavismo, like Hugo Chavez, and all the left-wing movements in Latin America, many of which are just all these disparate groups. So totally nonsensical. And he also talks about how it originates with a bunch of Jews in France. So, throw in some classic anti-Semitism. And this is, I mean, it sounds crazy when you listen to it, and it's all in Spanish. It's, not even, I just put a tiny segment of it in my video so people can see. But I mean, this crackpot Nazi is the guy who the police and military are looking to for some kind of intellectual framework for how to defeat this uprising, which means just, go out and kill people. Just go out and shoot them, as if you need some deep theory to know that to just go shoot people. But I mean, this is, it's just incredible to see that this Nazi, they had an actual Nazi come in. There are photos of him with the Nazi flag behind him. He denies the label. But it's obvious what he is. And this is the guy that the Colombian government, that the U.S. allied Colombian government is relying on. So another, U.S. allied Nazi state, basically, fascistic state, looking more. I mean, Colombia is looking more and more like a fascistic dictatorship. And I don't want to use hyperbole, but it's when they're just murdering protesters in the street, and then it turns out that an actual neo-Nazi is advising them. I don't know what else to say. Then this is looking like a fascist dictatorship.
Well, what do you say about the world superpower? Still democratic in form at home, in a way, kind of, but behind every tyranny on the planet. Right down to where it's not just calling names, but where you have, in Ukraine, where these guys are proudly flying swastikas and wolf's angles and all of these things, however you pronounce that, right? These, Nazi symbols and proudly boast their allegiance to the ghost of Stepan Bandera and all of this stuff. Yeah. Wherever there's
Exactly.
a fascist dictatorship anywhere in the world, or a kingdom, absolute monarchy anywhere in the world, you can find the USA and the red, white, and blue right there supporting them. Just about every time, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, if you know any history from kind of post-World War II, where did Nazis go? Well, not only did a bunch of them come into the United States and become part of NASA and
I was going to say, aside
the
from the CIA, or what do you mean?
Yeah. Aside from the CIA, protecting them and bringing them into the U.S. to basically, help try to help defeat the Soviet Union and create its space and missile program. A bunch of them went to South America. And so, in several countries around South America, Chile being one of them, where they're really strong. There are real neo-Nazi parties in Chile. So there's still this whole issue. The coup in Bolivia, a lot of the street muscle behind that was a neo-fascist party. So I mean, it's not hyperbole. Took all these guys neo-fascists because that's really what they are, and they're direct ideological descendants. They see the Nazi regime as their heroes, and that's a lot of them come directly from that. So I mean, this guy who's advising the Colombian government, his name is Alexi Tapia Lopez. Sorry. He's part of that, and so there's this whole framework of Nazis that are kind of still existing in Latin America that a lot of people don't know about, but are powerful and basically tools of the U.S., of Western imperialism, and this is another example of of that exact phenomenon.
Yeah. All right, man. Well, I'll let you go. I really appreciate you coming back and helping us tack this end on this interview and keeping us up to date on this stuff. Good stuff, Dan, as always.
Thank you so much for having me, Scott. Appreciate it.
All right, you guys. That is Dan Cohen. Dan Cohen 3000 on Twitter. Follow him there. And, of course, his show on YouTube is called Behind the Headlines.
The Scott Horton Show, Anti-War Radio, can be heard on KPFK 90.7 FM in LA. APSradio.com, antiwar.com, scotthorton.org, and libertarianinstitute.org.